Hello, everyone, and welcome to Big Jeff's Football Insights every Thursday on the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, Big Jeff McMichael. As always, we are presented by or sponsored, brought to you by FanDuel and part of the Believe Podcasting Network. This was pre-recorded earlier on Thursday, as typical. As always, really important for us, please like the podcast, forward it, subscribe to the Big Ten Huddle if you haven't done that yet. Our goal every week, through JR, Zach, and myself, other special guests provide comprehensive coverage and analysis of all Big Ten teams, been focused on football, obviously, as we head to the, final championship week here, but cover basketball as well here on the Big Ten Huddle. So we'd appreciate that. My agenda this week is pretty simple. I'm going to review week 14, which is the final week of the regular season first. That's number one. Draw some insights from especially the two games that I predicted poorly, I might add. And then number two, talk about this just championship game between 1 and 2 Ohio State and Indiana Hoosiers. As Kirk Cignetti had said last year, the new superpower in college football. Just crazy to think about. And I know Zach and JR reviewed this game in depth as well, I believe, on the podcast this morning. Mine is going to go deeper as usual. I bring more statistics, and I have some pretty cool tables here to show how dominant these teams are, and looking at advantages in the matchup. And the other thing is I have some real strong personal connections. Those that have listened to me, I'm going to hit on those and draw relevance to this current matchup and kind of how crazy it is. Final reminder before we dive in, all this information, all these tables will be included in a comprehensive article on my website, bigjeffsfootball.com. So, it's some pretty interesting stats here. You can see all of it in depth on my website. Okay, so let's get into the first topic, which is week 14, how I did. In aggregate, 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, I moved to just picking two games. And this is the first time I went 0-2. I'd been going 1-1. Unfortunately, I went 0-2. It leaves me at 29-29 for the year overall against the spread. So, I'm average, I guess. Big Jeff is an average dude. And I've lost 2 straight Lock City picks as well. So I'm 6-5 in my Lock City picks, which is the one game during the week that I have the most confidence in versus the spread. So let's do a quick review of what I got right and wrong. So it's mostly going to be what I got wrong. Let's talk about the first game, the Big Ten game of the week, of course, was the game in Ann Arbor. And FanDuel had Ohio State as a 10.5-point favorite in that one at the Big House. I'm assuming most of you saw it, well aware. Ohio State won 27-9, so they won by 18 points. I'd predicted 24-17, so I was pretty close on the Ohio State score. Kind of overdid what I thought Michigan could do. In some, I was worried about the impact of the weather on the game. I think the prediction of snow for the game really favored Michigan's run-oriented offense, or should have favored that. I was expecting a sloppy game, and it was semi-sloppy. Really, the only thing that the weather impacted, in my view, is if it wasn't so sloppy, I think Ohio State would have continued to be pretty aggressive going in there after that Michigan secondary that they had so much success for. So if anything, Michigan's lucky. I think the weather prevented the final score from not being higher, I believe. And then this game really was all about what was in between the ears for Ryan Day and his coaching staff and even the players. If this was basically pure line talent, I would not have taken Michigan I didn't take them to win, but I did expect them to cover the points. I would not have done that if it weren't for the mental aspect of this game. So some of the things I got right within this game, I thought the big difference maker would be the Ohio State elite defense, nation's best. I figured they would hold down Michigan pretty well. They held them to 9 points, 163 total yards of offense, 44 yards in the second half, really wild. Only 63 passing yards from Bryce Underwood. And then finally, Michigan was 1 for 9 on third down. So really, they did have some initial success, but they really clamped down after that. I also called out how Ohio State clearly had the much better quarterback in Julian Sayin, and this game really magnified that even more. He had been playing like maybe the best quarterback in the nation. And other than that terrible second pass, which it was pretty alarming, it was a bad throw. But other than that, he was mostly sensational. 233 yards, 3 touchdowns under, snowy conditions, and played really well. Underwood, 8 for 18 for 63 yards, late interception. Really, the game was in hand by then. But frankly, he looked overwhelmed by the Ohio State defense. He would go to check down, his passes really frequently when sometimes in that zone there were open guys, and he was kind of rushing his throws. He kind of was just kind of feeling it, and you could tell he just wasn't really comfortable. The other thing I thought is I didn't think Ryan Day would come out conservative. I think he learned through the playoffs, be who you are. Ohio State, strength is their passing game. Lean into that. And despite the weather, that was the only question. He did lean into that. It did lead to that interception early, but they stuck with it. They didn't panic. And that was really impressive. Ohio State uses the pass to set up the run game, and this is now going to be an infamous drive in the second half where Ohio State went on a 20-play, 81-yard drive. It took almost 12 minutes off the clock, almost a full quarter. Crazy. They ended up kicking a field goal to go up 27-9. The game was over at that point with 8 minutes left. There's the stat of the team that rushes the most in this game won. I think it's 25 of the last 26. It's a very real stat. I do think it's overrated. I do think the team that gets ahead, they're ahead, then they're going to run the ball to maintain the clock, run the clock, maintain the possession of the ball, run the clock. And so it's going to tend to favor the team that rushes the most, because in the past, Ohio State has been aggressive in throwing the ball as well, and getting out to a lead and then turning to the run. But it is important for sure. And it ended up Ohio State outrushed Michigan 186-100. Youth for Ohio State going to be a major factor in this Indiana game and for this playoff run. The emergence of true freshman running back Bo Jackson. With a name like that, you got to be good. 117 yards, that was a season high. Also at 49 yards receiving, and a couple of those catches were really impressive to me. So really, Ohio State most of the year has had, a fairly mediocre running game. That's been kind of maybe the one weakness. It's just getting stronger and stronger, and certainly against Michigan, it was good. I guess the other thing, just to mention, scouts are raving about Julian Sayin. I listen to a lot of podcasts and everything. It's not just having great receivers and they're wide open. People are really impressed with his quick release, great pocket presence, and accuracy and quick decision making. Let's turn to Michigan here. Despite Ohio State dominating, they really got out to I won't call it an ideal start, but a great start. Jalen Marshall broke out a big run. They got an early field goal. In fact, they got a field goal that first drive. I don't think that hurt him. Early lead, that's good. But then after the Sayin interception, when they didn't convert that to a touchdown, to me, that was bad. That would have been huge going up 10-0. That really would have maybe caused a little bit of major concern, maybe panic for Ohio State. The fact that they were only up 6-0, though, meant Ohio State wasn't panicking. And so that's where really part of the early part of why the game was lost, not converting to those into touchdowns. The other thing with this game that was a mystery to me is I really thought Michigan doesn't have great skill players. Good running game, very good running game. I thought they were going to run Bryce Underwood a lot, though, and that would really cause Ohio State to have to adjust to Michigan, and maybe that would create some better passing lanes. He tried a little bit, but I think he had 6 carries for 1 yard. Urban Meyer, I heard him on a call. I think he was on the McShay podcast. He thought Michigan should run Underwood something like 15 times, right? Run him a lot. And he's a big physical kid, but they didn't do that. So to me, you just really have to question, what was Michigan's game plan? Did they really expect him to sit back there and throw into that Ohio State zone and with a lot of success? And so I think it just raises some red flags for Michigan. I'm not saying Sherrone Moore is on the hot seat, but clearly next year, things need to be better. They went 9-3 this year, but the schedule was pretty easy. I know they played Oklahoma on the road, but the Big Ten schedule was pretty easy. Is Sherrone Moore the right man for the job? Does he have the right coordinators in place? That's one question for sure. And then the other thing is, Bryce Underwood, many think, had a good, solid year, but didn't develop quite as much as they were expecting for being, the number one quarterback recruit in the nation. So do they have the right staff? Is he in the right program to develop Underwood to where he should be, which should be eventually a first-round NFL draft pick? So that's up in question. And then Michigan, they really need to add to their receiver core and their skill positions. They need to help Bryce Underwood out by giving him more weapons. So that's a wrap on that one. My Lock City pick of the week, very disappointing. I lost that one. I took Penn State. They were a 13.5-point FanDuel favorite on the road at Rutgers. I predicted a very comfortable 37-20 win for Penn State. Turned it into a quite uncomfortable 40-36 win for Penn State. Coming into the game, I thought this was an easy win. Penn State was on a roll. They had beat Michigan State by 18. They had beat Nebraska by 27 the week before. They were looking more like the team everyone had predicted to start the year. Now, without an experienced quarterback, Drew Aller injured, I didn't think they were going to be a top 10 team playing like them, but clearly playing kind of like a top 20 team. And then Rutgers just not very good, 5-6 team. SP Plus had them ranked 72nd. And I also love the momentum Terry Smith had built, right? It had the players excited, playing hard. They were playing for Terry, right? They want Terry Smith to be the next coach for Penn State. And amazingly, Penn State still hasn't named the coach. That's a story in itself. We should probably have a podcast on that if JR hasn't already. But they seem really highly motivated. So I really liked all that to say they're going to continue that momentum to cover this 13.5. And then, for Rutgers, they struggled to run the ball consistently, did have good passing, but Penn State's defense was better against the pass than the run. So I thought that was a good fit. They had the type of pass rushers, too, that could give fits to the Rutgers offensive line. But really, it didn't work out that way. The Nittany Lions gave up 338 yards to Rutgers and Ethan Kalik-Manis, 15.4 yards per pass. And weren't that much better against the run. Penn State gave up 195 yards, 4.6 yards per carry, and Penn State was outgained by Rutgers, 533 to 509. I did like how Penn State also was focused on Katron Allen and riding him, and they basically were giving him twice the number of carries versus early in the year. And Rutgers has the Big Ten worst run defense. It did work out favorably for Penn State. They rushed for 300 yards, 9.1 yards per carry. Katron Allen, career high, 226 yards, over 10 yards per carry. But it came down to, if it not for a fourth quarter fumble by Ethan Kalik-Manis, return for Penn State TD, Rutgers probably wins this game. So just, really disappointing. Penn State did pull it out, so I don't want to be too negative here on Penn State. They got their 6th win, and they will be going to a bowl game. Rutgers at 5-7 won't make it. I think one of the things just points out, when you think of Penn State's defense, they hired Jim Knowles from Ohio State. Some people thought coming in he was the best defensive coordinator in college football. I would have to say, based on the results, I think Jim Knowles maybe did the worst of any coordinator in the Big Ten this year. He would have like the worst coordinator of the year award if they would give that out, which is pretty amazing. Penn State's defense was supposed to be a strength going into the year. They really were a liability. So think of this. Last year under Tom Allen, who was in his first year as well, just like Knowles is in his first year, they were giving up 295 yards a game, which was 7th in the nation in defense under Tom Allen. This season, 334 yards per game. That's 35th in the nation. That's a huge drop off. And the rushing defense went from 9th in the nation last year to 71st in the nation. Scoring defense, 16 and a half points last year for 8th in the nation. This year, giving up 21 plus points a game for 37th in the nation. Now, I know they did have a big injury to linebacker Tony Rojas early in the season, but beyond that, they were pretty healthy on that defense. So I just think it was crazy. It was a crazy season for Penn State, but it's crazy that that defense was as bad as it was. Offensively, you can explain Drew Aller didn't get out to a good start, then he got hurt. You can explain that, but it makes no sense why Penn State was that bad on defense. Just for Rutgers, what a brutal way to lose with that fumble. Preseason over-under was 5.5 wins per FanDuel, so they won 5 games, so they weren't that far off. And the reason only 5.5 wins, they did have a hard schedule. So post-season here, PFF had it as the 10th hardest schedule in the nation for Rutgers, 4th hardest in the Big Ten. So it wasn't easy for them, but just shame for Rutgers. Kind of a waste of Calic Manis's senior year, a waste of a strong offense, frankly. Laying all the blame on that defense. Last in the Big Ten in total defense, 3rd to last in scoring defense. So Greg Schiano basically has a lot of work to do to get Rutgers back to where they should be. Hopefully they'll have an easier schedule next year that will help with that. So that's really, what I got mostly wrong, again, because I won 0-2, but within the games, I got some things right. All right, let me back out of here. Show another table. All right. So this is topic number 2. We're going to talk about the 2 games that I'm going to cover in detail here and predict. I'm calling it Championship Week 15. So I list here like the 4 Power 4 conference championship games, just so that you can see each of them, kind of the spreads from FanDuel, the over-unders. Of course, we have the colossal matchup, number 1 Ohio State versus number 2 Indiana. That is the Big Ten game of the week. Obviously, it's the only game of the week. And then I also list for fun Kennesaw State Conference USA Championship. 2.5 point favorite over Jacksonville State. I list that because for personal reasons, Kennesaw State, their 2nd year in FBS football. Last year, they went 2-10. Ironically, so my son is a sophomore at Kennesaw State University. Pretty cool. Last year, I went to a game with him, a random game, and it happened to be the game they upset Liberty in one of the biggest upsets of the year. It was their first FBS win. They only won one other game, but I was there for that game. And then Kennesaw State played Indiana in the non-conference schedule. So my son and I went to that game, which was a lot of fun, like the 3rd game of the year. So I just list that out of kind of for personal reasons. And I will be choosing, I have as my Lock City pick of the week, number 3 Georgia as a 2.5 point favorite against number 9 Alabama. That game is here in Atlanta. So I live in Atlanta, been living here for over 20 years. After living in the Midwest for most of my life leading up to that. So that is the 2 games I will be covering. So, all right, let's get into this. And I'm going to go into depth here, cover some personal things with this, but number 1 Ohio State, a 4.5 point favorite over Indiana. Now, today I think I saw it's 4 points, but I'm using 4.5. I had all my tables updated with that information. So, the spread might move a little bit more. Over under is I think 47.5. I have listed here. Let's move a little bit as well. The winner will be Big Ten champion, of course, get the number 1 seed in the playoffs. What's interesting about that, I'm not so sure you get the best matchup if Notre Dame is the 8 or 9 seed, which maybe not because a lot's going on with that. But I wouldn't want to play Notre Dame in that quarterfinal. I'd much rather play in Bama or Ole Miss or those teams. So, the number 1 seed isn't necessarily the best seed to have, depending on how everything shakes out. But anyway, you do want to win the Big Ten championship. So the game still matters a lot. Indiana, in that regard, they have 2 Big Ten titles, 1945 and 1967. Ironic. So I'm 58 years old. I was born in 1967. That's the last time Indiana won the Big Ten title. For Ohio State, they've won it 40 times. So the only team who's won more is Michigan. And for Ohio State, it would be their first since 2020. So, the stakes are super high as far as the winner of this game. Everyone's talking about likely the quarterback, Julian Sayin or Fernando Mendoza, will probably win the Heisman. If it's both players playing pretty similarly, I do think Mendoza will get the edge there, but really it's probably going to be the winner is also going to get the Heisman Trophy. Indiana's never won the Heisman Trophy. For Ohio State, that'd be the 8th for Ohio State and first since Eddie George won it in 1995. I've heard some say this game means more to Indiana. In one sense, I get that. Since it's such a rarity for them to be in the spot. They did lose to Ohio State last year, so they got a chip on their shoulder. But really, all these coaches, they're hyper competitive. No one's going to hold back here. So all these Ohio State players have never won a Big Ten championship. It'd be different if Ohio State, has appeared here the last few years. So it's like another return to Indianapolis. But none of that is in play here. So, if anything, I think for the fans of Indiana, I think it means this game more to the fans of Indiana than Ohio State. But Ohio State has a lot of pride, and they badly want to be unbeaten and win the title. Michigan got on Ohio State last year for, not only not beating them and winning it, but losing 2 games and saying that kind of downgraded that championship. So this still means a lot to the fans and to the players. Just more on a personal level. So I'm a 1990 graduate of Indiana, a long-suffering basketball and football fan of the Hoosiers. So the fact that we're here is truly amazing. And then I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. I moved to Wisconsin when I was 4 years old. And I was a Reds fan in the 70s. And then in 1979, I saw Art Schlichter, quarterback for Ohio State, on the cover of Sports Illustrated after they beat Michigan. I remember just reading that article and just saying, well, I'm from Ohio. I should root for this team. They're good. And so ever since then, I've been a huge Ohio State football fan. So I'm really an anomaly here. I'm wearing my Indiana sweatshirt this week. I've been alternating between wearing Indiana, Ohio State. I went to my son's school's basketball game wearing an Indiana sweatshirt and an Ohio State baseball cap. And then you'd be amazed how many people are like, whoa, you can't do that. Like I was breaking a rule or something. And they're like, how can you have both those as your teams? And I explained it to them. So, this is like nirvana for me. My 2 teams are playing each other, the traditional blue blood Ohio State and Indiana, the new superpower, is the other team. So it's just crazy. The other thing is just, it's special because Indiana, we're supposed to be a blue blood in basketball, but we mostly crap the bed, if you will, the last 20 plus years, hiring their own coaches and everything. And so I'm pretty kind of ticked off at Indiana for just screwing things up in basketball. So it's really refreshing to be good in football here. To me, Indiana basketball should be like Ohio State is in football, should be a blue blood team, should be in the discussion to make Final Fours every year. And every few years win a national championship, and we have not been close to that. Last time Indiana won a basketball title, 1987, that was my freshman year. Keith Smart hit the jump shot, Bobby Knight's last championship, and I thought, man, did I choose the right school of Indiana, right? We're going to win championships every few years and everything, and we haven't won since. So all that to say, it's damn hard to be really good in a sport consistently, which Ohio State has been in football. And, it's just for Indiana to be this good is very surreal 2 years in a row. And so I just think it's crazy to be here. Another personal thing, and I know I'm hitting you with a lot here. When is the last time Indiana beat Ohio State in football? I should know because I was there. November 5th, 1988. Indiana, behind all-time great running back Anthony Thompson, beat Ohio State 41-7. And it was the second consecutive year Indiana beat Ohio State. That was the first year was in Columbus, and that was Earl Bruce famously said, the coach for Ohio State, "This is the darkest day in Ohio State football since I've been associated with it." And then Bill Mallory said, "We didn't come here to lose." He was the coach of Indiana. "This is a great confidence builder. Now the people will understand Indiana plays some great football." So really, when I was at Indiana, Bill Mallory had them playing pretty damn good football. He was like a mini Kurt Cignetti, not near the success Cignetti has had. 2 weeks after that first win against Ohio State in 1987, Indiana beat Michigan, and they didn't do that again until like 2021, I think it was. So Mallory had some good success there. And in fact, this is sad to say, Mallory was at Indiana and led them to a bowl win in 1991 season, New Year's Eve against Baylor. That was the last time Indiana has won a bowl game. 1991. Think about that. So it just goes to show how bad Indiana is. Mallory finished with an under 500 record, but he did, like I said, over 13 seasons, 6 bowls and 2 bowl wins. So that was good. And he finished with the all-time winningest coach. Okay, a few other things on this. Ohio State leads the all-time series 81-12 and 5 ties. First game in 1901. Indiana actually got out to won 5 of the first 6. So since then, Indiana is 7-81 and 4. And then prior to that 87 win that I was talking about, the darkest day for old Bruce, they had previously only won in 1951. So that's 2 Indiana wins over the last 74 years. So that's why I say for Indiana fans, this would be just colossal and would win so much. Cignetti, 23-2 at Indiana, just crazy. Bo McMillan is the last coach to have a winning record for Indiana. He last coached in 1947. So since 1947, Indiana hasn't had a coach with a winning record over 500. And here Cignetti is 23-2. I could just go on and on. I'm sorry for doing all that, but anyway, so let's jump into this. Both teams 12-0, 9-0 in the Big Ten. Ohio State has not lost. They've won 16 in a row. Has not lost since losing to Michigan last year. And I was at that game. That was my high school graduation gift to my son, Jed, who goes to Kennesaw State. So my 2 sons were there in person. We saw it all. We were devastated. Saw the flag planting. Couldn't believe it. And then, I told them if Ohio State manages to make it to the championship in Atlanta, we're not going. I spent too much money on it. Here they make a run. And the night before the championship game against Notre Dame, thankfully, I pulled the trigger at 10 p.m. that night and spent $7,500 for 3 tickets. And we went to the game, had the time of our lives, and it semi-erased the Michigan loss. I mean, it still stunk that we lost that, but just really an amazing thing. But Ohio State's just been on a roll then. That just took all the pressure that winning the championship put all the pressure off Ryan Day and really led to the 12-0 record and helping them beat Michigan this year. Let's see here. Okay, so let's get into some of the statistics for the games. I'm going to show you just some statistics to show how dominant these teams are, and it's just crazy good in dominance. So I'm going to show you some tables here. For those not seeing the tables, I'll explain it. But in dark green, which is a lot of these cells here, it shows any stat where Indiana or Ohio State is ranked in the top 5 in the nation. So, playoff committee, of course, Ohio State is ranked 1, Indiana number 2. ESPN SP Plus, which is like a a statistical model to rank teams. Ohio State 1, Indiana 2 in the nation. SP plus offense, Ohio State 5th best offense, Indiana 3. Defense, Ohio State 1, Indiana 2. FPI index for ESPN, Ohio State 1, Indiana 2. Strength of record by ESPN, Ohio State's 2, Indiana's 1. ESPN's efficiency index, that gets into game control and things like that, I believe. Ohio State is 2, Indiana 1. Virtually 1 and 2 almost across all these. Strength of schedule, not quite as good. PFF has Ohio State 32nd best schedule, Indiana 63rd. And then just so how a strength of schedule can vary, ESPN strength of schedule at Ohio State 46th, Indiana is 45th. So, not bad schedules, but certainly I would agree, both these teams went into the year with the schedules that looked a lot tougher, but frankly, they both played Penn State. You could kind of blame Penn State for the real reason why their schedules really didn't look that good. So, thank you very much, Nittany Lions, with that. So let's look at also some other statistics here, which really shows further how close these teams are from a statistical standpoint. So bringing up another table. So let's just look at, for example, just total offense here. And again, if it's in dark green, that means the teams are in the top 5 in the nation. And there's 134 FBS teams, I believe. If it's in light green, it's top 25. And if it's not shaded, then it's outside the top 25. So total offense, Ohio State ranked 24th. Indiana's 5th in total offense. Scoring offense, Ohio State 13th, Indiana 2nd. But other important things like third down conversions, Ohio State's 1, Indiana is 2nd in the nation. Pass efficiency offense, Ohio State is number 2 in the nation, Indiana number 1. Red zone offense, not elite. Ohio State is 30th, and that is an area for concern for Ohio State. We saw it against Michigan, right? They had that drive where they're down 6-0, got it inside the 3-yard line after that long Bo Jackson run, and then Michigan stymied them. They even got a first down on that headbutt play for Michigan. Had 6 to 7 plays and couldn't punch it in. So that is a concern, but it's not bad at 30th, and then Indiana's better at 17th. How about defensively? And I think this is where the two teams really shine even a lot more, in my view. Total defense, Ohio State 1 in the nation, Indiana 4th. What about scoring defense? Let's go to that. Ohio State 1, Indiana 2. Rushing defense, I think, is an important one. Ohio State 4, Indiana 2. Passing defense, Ohio State 1, Indiana is 14th. Still really good, but not elite. And then how about red zone defense? Important statistics, man. Ohio State, number 1. Indiana is 60th, but I tell you, that's deceiving because this is a percentage of scoring per red zone opportunities. And so, there's a lot of field goals here for Indiana, and that's 60%. So they're better than that. But what's really amazing is Ohio State only allowed 2 red zone attempts. I believe it was 20 attempts. They're 2nd in the nation in red zone attempts allowed, which is 20. And then Indiana, I think, was 18 only allowed, number 1. So, they're not letting teams even get inside the 20-yard line. This is an important one, though, here. Turnover margin, a big one for Indiana, 1st in the nation. And this is one of the big keys to their success. Indiana is just so fundamentally sound. They don't turn the ball over, and yet they create turnovers. They're plus 17 on the year, which is just crazy. I think, let me have the stats here on that. Turnovers. Let's see. I was hoping to read some of the details of the turnover rate. Ohio only 7 turnovers given up for Indiana, 24 created. So that's the plus 17. Ohio State, though, is good as well. 34th in turnover margin. They're plus 5. So it's not like they're turning over a lot. The difference is Ohio State doesn't create a lot of turnovers. So they only have 13 turnovers created, where Indiana had 24, and then only 8 given up, whereas Indiana had 7 turnovers given up. So, and then fewest penalty yards. Indiana, third best in the nation in penalty yards given up. Ohio State is a very good 24th still. So just 2 really fundamentally sound programs for sure. And I guess the final thing I want to say before we get into my traditional reasons for Ohio State versus Indiana to cover, just thinking of the coaching advantage here, to me, this is about a draw. And I know if you're an Ohio State fan, you're probably aghast when you hear that. And if you're an Indiana fan with Cignetti, you're like, what are you talking about? Cignetti's done more with less. And then, Ryan Day has all these 5 stars. Cignetti is clearly better. I mean, there's an argument that can be made for both. The fact that Ryan Day lost all those players and then just is even better this year is just crazy as well. I just think both staffs are just elite in what they do, game planning. Their coordinators are excellent. I would maybe give a slight advantage to Ohio State only because of this. The playoff run and the big game experience at this level. For sure, Ohio State has more experience than Curt Cignetti's group does, who have been in big games, the last 2 seasons, but less of them and more big games at a lower level at James Madison and these other schools. But really, to me, it's basically a draw here. Which is really why also everyone's so excited about this. It's more than just the team. It's watching these coaching staffs go at each other for sure. All right, so let me see what okay. So we're going to get into now we're getting the 3 reasons why Ohio State can cover the 4.5 points. So this is the first one. I don't think Indiana will be able to run consistently on Ohio State. So Fernando Mendoza will have to have a truly great game passing the ball, which he's certainly capable of for Indiana to win the game or cover. So this is something on the negative side I've identified a couple of weeks ago in analyzing a different Indiana game. And I think Zach, I know I heard him talk about this as well. I think Zach, if you're listening, you stole it from me because I have been talking about this for a while. But when Indiana is up against talented and physical defensive front sevens, their Big Ten leading rushing offense, which they have, the best rushing offense in the Big Ten, I think it's 9th in the nation. It's really struggled, though, against strong front seven. So that's what this table we're looking at here attempts to do. The top of the table shows what I consider the weaker defensive fronts they played against 8 teams. It shows the number of rushing yards per carry, and where that team ranks in rushing defense in the nation. So against these 8 weaker teams, Indiana averaged 294 yards a game. I have the total there, 2,351 yards. So almost 300 yards a game at 6.8 yards per carry. This is an incredible thing. Against six of the 8 teams here in this category, Indiana rushed for over 300 yards. So that includes Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State, Illinois, Maryland, and Purdue. So just they were dominating, these weaker front 7 teams and just pummeling them. And just an example, Maryland with the 102nd worst run defense in the nation, UCLA 108th, etc. So at the bottom of the table is where Indiana is going against what I consider the better front sevens. Now I include here Oregon, Iowa, and Wisconsin in this category. Now statistically, Penn State I throw in as a 4th team. They statistically might not have had the greatest, rushing defense, but they still had dudes, right? They still had a really talented defensive line. So that's why I put them in here. But against these 4 teams, Indiana averaged just 2.8 yards per carry, and they only averaged 101 rushing yards per game. So think about that. 2.8 yards per carry, 101 rushing yards per game against the better teams. So, this is a major concern of mine. Ohio State, the bottom line is just Ohio State's front seven is better than the four, Iowa's, Oregon's, Penn State's, and Wisconsin for sure. And so I just have a hard time. I'm not saying Indiana's not going to be able to run at all, but, I see them struggling to run really effectively. And I just think Mendoza then is going to have a huge game for Indiana to cover here. And I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm just saying I think he's going to have to. All right, number 2 reason to like Ohio State here, just the defense. This defense might be an all-time great college football defense. We won't find out till the very end here. They have high-level NFL players across all 3 levels, and then they have some true unicorns that I think could really make a difference here. It's really going to be hard for Indiana to score enough to win here. In any conversation on Ohio State should start with the defense. Record making numbers on the how much points they've given up. Only 93 points across 12 games. That's less than 8 points a game. Clearly number 1 in the nation on that. Most they gave up was 16 to Illinois. The closest margin of victory was 7 to Texas. But beyond that, driven by this defense, the second closest wins were 18-point wins over Washington, Illinois, and Michigan, all 18-point wins. So, unicorn players is a key thing to this, and it's not to throw shade at Indiana. Indiana has really good players. I just don't think they have elite players like Ohio State has. Mendoza is elite, but I don't think Indiana has the equivalent one, despite how good Pons is at cornerback. I know Indiana fans will be saying, what are you talking about there? But just, Ohio State, what I call a unicorn player, it'd be like Caleb Downs, the safety at Ohio State, who, of course, just won the Defensive Player of the Year award and the best secondary player in the Big Ten. And then linebacker Alvaro Reese, some think he might be the first pick in the draft. And the reason is he might end up being a rush defensive end, a stand-up rush defensive end, because he's so talented. He's big, 6'4", 245. Just both those players are projected to be top 5 picks. And really, when you have players like that, they're more likely to make a huge play to turn a game, to just turn a game around. And not like Indiana players can't make those, but just when you're that elite athletically and mentally, it's more likely to happen. And everyone talks about, Downs being the jackknife and just the football IQ and how that's allowed defensive coordinator Matt Patricia, who we probably should talk about more here, just changing up looks, runs a pretty sophisticated, complex NFL-like defense, and I don't think he could do it if he didn't have Caleb Downs, who's really the quarterback of the defense. And it goes deeper, defensive tackle for Ohio State. Kaden McDonald, considered by many the best tackle in the nation, just won the best defensive lineman of the year award in the Big Ten as well. Projected as a mid-first round pick. Linebacker Sonny Styles projected as a first rounder. Defensive end Caden Curry, day 1 NFL pick. I don't think he's going to be a first round pick. And then all Big Ten, first team all Big Ten cornerback Davison Igbinosun, going to go probably day 1. Just Ohio State is loaded. Hard to find a weakness in this Ohio State defense. So, and I expect when I look at the matchup here against Indiana, the right side of Indiana's offensive line had some injury issues, and it's weaker than the left side. Right guard Bray Lynch ranks as above average per Pro Football Focus, but not super strong. And then right tackle is likely going to be Zen Mokowski, a former Ohio State transfer in this one. He's just slightly above average. So, just a tough matchup for for Indiana's offense. Number 3, to like Ohio State, their passing game is elite. So 2 first-round NFL caliber wide receivers, great tight ends, and even running back Bo Jackson, big pass-catching capability out of the backfield, going to be extremely difficult for Indiana to contain. So I know Indiana contained Oregon very well, held them to 186 yards, picked off 2 passes. I do think Ohio State, though, is better than the Ducks passing games. Starts with Julian saying, Heisman Trophy contender. We know all about this. First-year starter, crazy. Almost 80% of his passes completed. Third best in yardage in the Big Ten, over 3,000 yards, 30 TDs, 5 interceptions. An ESPN quarterback rating metric has saying number 1 in the nation. Fernando Mendoza is number 2, though, right up there. PFF has saying as the nation's best offensive rating and quarterback rating. So he just has great accuracy, ability to slide, to complete throws. And then I think what's a crazy stat is Ohio State's offensive line is not great at run blocking, even though it's improving. Their pass blocking is tremendous. Sayin has only been sacked 6 times this year. And against a good Michigan front, I think he only had 3 pressures. I'm not going to go on too much about, Jeremiah Smith. He's looked at as the next potential Julio Jones. He's that good, likely top 5 pick. PFF's really strong numbers, 5th best receiver ranking per PFF. Carnell Tate, PFF has him as the 4th best performing receiver. He's going to be a first-round pick. And then Max Clare, probably a potential first-day pick. And then you've got sophisticated offense being run by Ryan Day and Brian Hartline. Bo Jackson also coming on, running the ball, 952 yards rushing, 4th in the Big Ten there. So bottom line is, great weapons for Ohio State. But Indiana has a great defense, excellent defensive backs, and we're going to talk about them. It's going to be the toughest defense Ohio State has faced for sure this year. So let's get into the reasons why. Take Indiana and the points. And I said, let's go into it. I said Indiana's going to, and Mendoza's going to have a great passing game. And that is definitely in play here. There's a reason why some have him as the number 1 pick in next year's draft. He's really good. He is accurate. He is tough. He's willing to run, and he's a leader. And like Ohio State, he has excellent receivers, like difference-making receivers. So, as great as Ohio State's defense is, they have not faced an offense nearly as good as Indiana's, and definitely a quarterback as good as Mendoza, for sure. Mendoza, so 32 TDs, 5 interceptions, been sacked 15 times. That's not crazy high. And I talked about all of his intangibles. 2 things can be true at once. In the big games against Iowa, against Oregon, and Penn State, Mendoza threw bad picks in those games. Pick 6 against Oregon was really bad. So that's a bad thing, right? And Mendoza's Sain's not throwing those bad picks. But, they have the confidence to come back like Mendoza did and lead game-winning drives is just huge. So, if Indiana gets down, they're not going to be afraid and not going to think that we can't come back here. But I think it's safe to say, given how good Ohio State is, Mendoza cannot afford in the second half to make one of those critical interceptions. I don't think he's going to have the chance to maybe make a comeback if he does that. So a lot the weapons to throw to. Elijah Surratt, first day NFL selection, probably for sure. Don't think he's going to be a first round pick, but just a clutch receiver, had that touchdown against Iowa, game winning. And then we all know, Omar Cooper Jr., what he's done. He's made some amazing catches this year, even beyond the Penn State back of the end zone catch to win the game. And then Charlie Becker emerging as a big bodied third threat. And then Riley Nowakowski, PFF has him rated as the 9th best tight end in the nation this year. So they have more than enough weapons to challenge OSU's secondary. And the key is giving Mendoza time, right? That's going to be a big thing in this game. But if they can't give him time, I do think Indiana can really attack Ohio State on the outside, especially targeting a good but not great cornerback in Jermaine Matthews Jr. PFF has him ranked the 538th best performing cornerback in the nation. That's not that good. That's 538 out of 924 cornerbacks. The other thing on 3rd and long situations, throw outside beyond the sticks, and you might get pass interference and a penalty. Both Matthews and Davison Igbinosun, really handsy, very physical, and they're prone, especially on third downs. It happened against Michigan twice, to get a pass interference. So I think Indiana can really take advantage of that. And we'll see how the refs are calling it in this game, but that's an opportunity for Indiana. Number two, why do I like Indiana? I think the Indiana defense, a true strength of the team last year, it's exactly the same this year. It's the strength of the team this year as well. That front four has the personnel that could really put a lot more pressure on quarterback Julian Sayin and they're in the passing game for Ohio State that very few teams have been able to do this year. I do think the need for Indiana to generate pressure against Sayin, which Indiana's capable of, this is the biggest factor in this game for IU to win or cover. There's really no doubt in my mind. And they really could get this done. Just going beyond that, Indiana's defensive line, best they'll face. Mikel Kamara at end is their best rated defensive end per PFF. Tyreek Tucker in the middle, 10 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. Stephen Daly, I don't even have stats in front of me, but all kinds of tackles for loss. Indiana has disruptive people that Brian Haynes likes to have them move a lot, stunt and everything. It's going to be a huge challenge for Ohio State's front of their defensive line. And I can tell you, just like Indiana, the right side of their offensive line has been a weakness. It's the same thing for Ohio State. Their right guard is a weakness. Tegro Shabola, he's just been inconsistent. At times he's been real good, but his PFF grades are pretty damn weak, and they've had to rotate in for him on sometimes. The right tackle, Philip Daniels, good but not great, so inconsistent. So, I think like Ohio State, all three levels of Indiana's defense is strong. You have an instinctive, aggressive linebacker like Aiden Fisher is really good. And then on the back end, D'Angelo Pons, the type of cornerback that can lock up potentially Carnell Tate or Jeremiah Smith. PFF has him playing as the fifth best cornerback, 5 out of 924 cornerbacks for D'Angelo Pons. And then the rest of the Indiana secondary ranks really, really high and above average. My one concern for Pons is he's 5'9", going against Jeremiah Smith, who's 6'3". So that's the one thing. And then Brian Haynes, we talked about him. He's been amazing as the coordinator. Ironically, Ohio State wanted to hire him. They went after him after Jim Knowles left. They ended up with Matt Patricia, but well-respected, and that guy's going to be a head coach someday. Number 3 reason to like Indiana, turnovers can be the difference between games against two teams that are pretty evenly matched. Turnovers can be the difference, and that's exactly what Indiana, tries to do in their defense, be disruptive. Talked about how they generated 24 turnovers already, 16 interceptions. That's tied for 9th in the nation. And then they rarely lose the ball. 6 interceptions, 1 fumble. So just, Indiana, while Ohio State doesn't have a tendency to turn it over a lot, this is what Indiana hangs their hat on kind of, and definitely can be a difference maker. I do think they need to win the turnover battle by 1 or 2, which would really help Indiana win the game. Other thing to think about for Ohio State, even though it'd be out of character to have a lot of turnovers, Sayin still is a redshirt freshman quarterback, and then Ohio State runs 2 true freshman running backs, Bo Jackson and Isaiah West are young running backs. Younger you are, the more likely to make a mistake. Here's a wild card in this game too to add. Just like in a tight game, what field goal kicker could kick the game-winning field goal, and that could dictate who wins the game. So statistically, that's Indiana. Nicholas Radicic won kicker of the year for the Big Ten. Just yesterday was announced. His field goal percentage, he's the only one in the nation, 100%, has not missed, 13 of 13 in field goals. So leads the nation there. Hasn't missed an extra point, all 70. And in field goals of 40 to 49 yards. He's 4 for 4. Now, Ohio State, Jaden Fielding, he's still real good. Tied for 15th in the nation with a 88% field goal rate, 15 to 17. Hasn't missed an extra point. But Fielding last year against Michigan, he missed 2 30-something yards field goals. If he made both of them, Ohio State wins for sure. I argue if he even made one of those last year against Michigan, they win the game. He never had to make a field goal in the playoff run to win it against Michigan last week. He didn't have to. So that's a big question mark. If it came down to that, I would give Indiana advantage there. All right, Jeff, you've talked too much here, buddy, right? What's your call? Let's say it, both teams unbeaten. And with the consensus that the loser will still be a top 4 team and get a first round bye, I think there's not much risk in this game, which is so exciting. Both teams are going to be hyper aggressive in this game. It's going to be magnified even more. Kurt Cignetti likes to be very aggressive in the first place, and he knows Indiana's going to have to score some points to win this game. The other thing is Ryan Day just took care of the biggest remaining question mark on his resume, beating Michigan. He had done it before. People make it sound like he hadn't won before. It really is aggravating for Ohio State fans like me, and I'm an Indiana fan, of course. But he's got that monkey off his back. So why would they be conservative in this game? I don't think he will be. Now, late in the game, yeah, he'll milk Clark if it's in play. But until they get that big lead, both these guys are going to be really aggressive. What that means is, midfield, 4th and 1, these teams are going for it, man. It's going to be exciting. There's going to be some, 4th and half yard from your own 35, and these guys might be going for it. So it's going to be just going to make the game just so awesome. A question I have too, will Ohio State have an emotional letdown after the Michigan game? It's been only a week. I do think it could mean Ohio State gets out to a slower start than Indiana, and that could be important for Indiana to get out to that fast start. But I think the coaching staff for Ohio State is just too good to let that happen. And so here's the bottom line. 2 extremely well-coached teams, elite football, playing elite football the whole year. I just think those unicorns for Ohio State makes a difference. I think overall Ohio State's talent level is still higher, but that's not in shade at Indiana. I have Ohio State winning 31-21, so they'd be covering the spread and winning. Give it a confidence of medium. It's not throwing shade at Indiana, guys. I would take Ohio State against any team in this field in one game for sure. If anyone was a 4.5 point spread, I'd be taking Ohio State. That's not a lot of points. And then the final factor, Brian Hartline hired by South Florida as their next coach. Will that have an impact here? Maybe a little, but here's the deal. Ryan Day has been the primary play caller up till like a year ago. He's elite. He's heavily involved anyway in the game plan, in the sheet that Hartline is calling off of. So I don't think this is going to have a big impact on this game, really, given that Ryan Day will just get more involved. All right, so final game here. I'm going to bring it up. We're almost done here. So let's talk about my Lock City pick of the week. Not going to be a deep dive here. It's Georgia, 2.5 point favorite over Alabama, 47.5 over under per FanDuel. 2 teams very similar. The biggest difference here, Georgia's offense is based on an effective run game, while Alabama has a very weak rushing attack and relies on Ty Simpson and his passing to move the ball down the field. So total offense, Georgia's 7th in the SEC. Alabama's right behind at 8th. Total defense, Alabama is 3rd in the SEC. Georgia's right behind at 4th. So both those are really close to each other. Bama does have a +8 turnover margin where Georgia is only -1. So Crimson Tide does take better care of the ball. Kirby Smart does have a Georgia or Alabama problem. They are under Kirby Smart. Georgia's 1-7 against Alabama. Now, one of those came early in the year when Alabama beat Georgia in Athens. So, he's 1-6 basically against Nick Saban and 0-1 against Kalen DeBoer. By the way, ESPN SP Plus has Georgia ranked 6th in the nation. Alabama is 12th as well. So that's just some background on that. So, what's my call here? I would just say, yes, Kirby Smart and Georgia, they do have an Alabama problem, but I do think it's a little bit more of a Kirby Smart problem, if you will. I don't like Alabama's inability to run the ball. They rank 103rd in the nation in rushing, only 3.7 yards per carry. So for Bama to win, I think Georgia's going to need to give them some turnovers. That certainly can happen, but I'm counting on Kirby's, Bama problem to have been mostly now labeled a Saban problem after this. So I'm taking Georgia to win and cover the points. I'm calling it Georgia 27, Alabama 21. That's my Lock City pick of the week. So obviously my confidence would be high on that. All right, so that's it for the week. Again, my article with all this and all these stats, bigjustfootball.com. Check it out. I am sure JR will have a post Big Ten championship game podcast. But in the meantime, thank you for supporting the Big Ten Huddle, for supporting myself, and enjoy the games on Saturday. And we'll just say bye for now.